morning. So today we are going to do something a bit different. Not that different, but a little bit different. Always I give you my own views, but today I'm going to change that up and give you the views of a few generals, Israeli generals, that I've heard speak. Uh, Basically, since this war broke out, what I do, basically, when I'm not doing some exercise or sleeping, I'm obsessing about what's going on in the war because obviously it is the biggest geopolitical and economic event that's going on in the world. That's absolutely important um, for the state of the world, obviously for financial markets. So that's what I've been spending all my time doing. And I came across a few uh, in-depth discussions by two former Israeli generals. They're not generals right now. They've left the army and now they head some Israeli geopolitical slash military think tanks in Israel. So I want to share, and the reason why I'm doing this, I'll tell you why I'm doing this, because we are all susceptible to our own biases. And I really want to make sure that I'm seeing this war completely objectively. And I have my own views, but I thought it would be very healthy not to share with you my views and not even to think very much, but just to hear what people who uh, are observing with people with tremendous sophistication, in-depth knowledge of the situation, and just share their views. Now, I want to say before we get into the guts of this discussion, personally, I've never seen in my entire career, my 30 plus year career, I've never seen what I consider to be a larger gap between investor perception and reality. The perception is that this war is incredibly chaotic, incredibly dangerous. It's on the edge of perhaps going in a very bad direction. It might work out okay, but in all likelihood, it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, if it does get better at all. So that's the perception, and that's why you've had this sort of nonstop selling in of stocks and this relentless rise in oil prices. Uh, the reality, I believe, is quite different. The reality is this war is going exceptionally well, far better than anticipated. The regime is being really hit very, very hard. So I think that's the reality. And the market, the investors are missing this. And I just want to share an anecdote with you. I spoke to a chief investment officer of one of the largest investment companies in the United States. I've known him for many years. Uh, so he used to be the chief investment officer at this big financial company. Now he runs the endowment for a very large college in the United States in Pennsylvania. I don't want to name his name. I don't want to name the university, the college, or the institution he used to work for. Um, but we had this exchange, and he said that the United States and Israel were going to run out of missiles over the next 3 days, 3 to 4 days. And this was 2 days ago. And I said, where are you getting your information? And he replied to me in a sort of very kind of almost like a nasty way. I've known him for a long time. He feels comfortable being a little bit nasty with me. That's fine. But he said, don't you read the newspapers? And I said, I do better than read the newspapers. If you're relying on the newspapers to do your research for you in this war, you're being severely misled. So with that, I want to get into the generals. Okay, the first general, his name is Amir Avivi. Okay, a very important general in the Israeli military, former general, and he has very up-to-date information. And this is his assessment of the war. He says that at this point, and this was as of yesterday, 85% of Iran's ballistic missiles uh, had been destroyed. Okay. Now, he might be a bit, this is Seth speaking, that he might be a bit optimistic, but that's what his sources are telling him. And he said that the United States and Israel have pretty much control over Iranian skies. They don't have total control, but close to total control. But in a number of days, maybe 2, 3 days away, we will have complete control over Iranian skies. And we'll get into a little bit later what exactly that means. He says that since the war started, Iran has fired about 200 missiles at Israel, and that is about 80% fewer missiles than what Israeli military planners had anticipated at this stage of the war. And the reason why it's just 80%, it's 80% fewer than expected is because of the damage that Israel did to during the 12-day war to their missile infrastructure, and also due to the incredible damage that the combination of the U.S. and Israel have done this time around in this war. Now, he says, so we said 85% of the missiles have been destroyed. Somewhere between 50% to 70% of the missile launchers have been destroyed. So that's incredibly important, right? If you don't have missile launchers, you doesn't matter how many missiles you have. If you can't launch them, those missiles are useless to you. Iran's missile launches have dropped by 90% since the war began. They also launch drones. We've been hearing a lot about drones being launched because they're having difficulty launching missiles. Their drone launches are down by 83% since the first day of the war. In terms of who Iran is launching missiles at, this is an interesting statistic. 60% of the missiles and drones had been targeted at Arab countries, and 40% have been targeted at Israel, right? That's extremely interesting, that differentiation, more towards Arab countries than towards Israel. And we'll get into why that's the case in a little bit. He says that much of Iran's remaining missile stockpile is in underground bases. And the Iranians thought that hiding their missiles underground would be a really good idea, that it would protect those missiles. But it's turned out, he says, that that's been a major mistake. And now the United States and Israel know exactly the locations of those underground bases. And because in a number of days, Israel and the United States will have complete control over Iranian airspace, it'll be incredibly easy to just take out all those underground storage bases. Now, until now, this is something that you don't hear at all in the media. Uh, Only Israel has been operating directly above Iranian skies. Trump wanted to take a more cautious approach, so the United States has been operating very effectively, incredibly effectively, but they've been operating in skies just outside of Iran. So the pilots and the military fighter planes would be out of harm's way. But again, once we have complete control, complete dominance over Iranian airspace, then the United States Air Force will also be operating directly in Iranian skies, so directly above Iran. And once that happens, once the United States is directly above, they'll stop using more expensive munitions, and they'll be able to use cheaper munitions, less expensive munitions, and they'll just get in really low altitudes and be able to fire away. And these less expensive munitions, we have endless supply of them. So when people talk about the threat that the US and Israel might be running out of munitions, that's nonsense. These less expensive munitions, we have like an infinite supply of them, an infinite supply. And we'll just be able to hover very low and bomb away and take out any target that we want. Uh, he says that Team USA, Israel, has the capacity to systematically destroy every single one of Iran's capabilities, their leadership, their military infrastructure, their ballistic military sites, their nuclear sites, their centers of command and control. Why are centers of command and control so important? Because once those are all obliterated, the military leadership cannot communicate to the rank and file who are following the commands and knowing what targets to hit. So very quickly, the command and control will be completely obliterated. Uh, he says that the destruction of the besieged, the IRGC. This is the paramilitary and official military. They're being hit now, and they will continue to be hit. And once we have complete control, and the U.S. Fighter planes can fly directly over Iranian airspace, that pummeling will just intensify. So far, most of the Iranian Navy has been sunk, sent to the bottom of the Persian Gulf. We have sunk 30 ships. So they still have a few more ships, but not many more. So essentially, they don't have a navy anymore. So very soon, we will be reaching a point where the regime will not have the ability to hurt Israel or its Arab neighbors anymore. So far, they've had very limited success in hitting Israel. They hit Israel basically in the first day of the war. There have not been any meaningful hits since then. A few of their missiles have landed in open airspace in Israel, but not much more than that. And as he mentioned, a huge percentage of their missile launchers and their missiles have been taken out. They've had somewhat more success in striking their Arab neighbors, but soon enough, that capacity will also be dramatic. It's already been dramatically reduced, but it'll be even more dramatically reduced and probably entirely eliminated fairly soon. We've been told, and he said it as well, we've been told by the Trump administration, he said that the operation is going to deepen very soon. And the U.S. will really start relying more and more on its B-1 bombers, its B-2 bombers, its B-52 bombers as they move directly over Iranian airspace, directly into Iranian airspace. As Iran has been hurt more and more, Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is Iran's terrorist proxy, has been shooting more missiles into Israel. And Israel has just begun to respond. And it has a very serious plan to deal with it. This is a plan that that has been in the making for a long time. And Israel has essentially just been waiting for Hezbollah to jump into the war. And in some sense, stupidly, Hezbollah has jumped into the war, he says. And now Israel is about to unleash a massive attack on Hezbollah. Now, he said that it's conceivable that the U.S. could even join into these strikes on Hezbollah. I don't, it's interesting he says that. I personally would be very surprised if that were to happen, but he said it. He obviously is hearing some things that I'm unaware of. I still would be surprised, but let's see. He said, and it's interesting, Trump just said it today, but he said this yesterday that the United States and Israel will not stop until Iran is completely defeated. There has been some speculation that Trump would be willing to stop at some point and walk away and leave a very hobbled Iranian regime. This general says, no, that's not going to happen. And Trump said the only way we would stop is if we get an unconditional surrender. So this general is, interestingly corroborating what Trump said today. Okay, let me move on to the second Israeli general. His name is General Cooperwasser. Uh, he says that Iran's goal. So he begins by focusing on what is Iran's strategy here. Um, and he says that Iran's strategy is to wear down the war effort, wear down the US and Israel's war effort. And essentially, the Iranians believe, and they've always believed it, that America and Israel are soft and they will tire easily. And that's why Iran is trying to expand the war to the broader Middle East. And they are striking as best they can Arab oil infrastructure. And they've gone after oil tankers, and they've gone after some oil fields of Arab countries. There was a oil facility in Bahrain that was hit yesterday. And by doing that, they are sending oil prices higher. And the goal is to turn the American public against the war, right? If they see oil prices going up and it becomes more expensive to fill up their cars, they'll start complaining about the war and get President Trump, to pull the plug on the war. That's their goal. And they're also trying to turn the Arab populations against the war. And that's why they're 60% of their missile strikes and drone strikes are targeting the Arab world, because they want the Arab countries to tire and get fearful of this war. And But so far, this strategy, at least in term, for the most part, at the end we may talk about a possible exception here, but for the most part, the Arab world is rallying around the United States and Israel. Um, so there's a lot of reason, this general says, to be encouraged, because the Arab countries are not falling for it. They're not falling into the Iranian trap. The American public will have to wait and see, he said. If you follow the media, you can see that the media is very much against the war. There's a decent percentage of, obviously the entire Democratic Party is against the war. And there are segments of a faction of the right wing is against the war. This is him talking. It's interesting how aware he is of American politics. He says that the Trump's core support base is firmly behind the war, and he cited figures that I've seen as well. That something like 86 to 87% of Trump voters of the MAGA movement support the war, but there is a faction that don't. And Iran's strategy here is to divide America. Okay. He says that the war has three major phases. The first phase is to weaken the right. Team USA, Team Israel has there's three major phases to our effort. First is to weaken the regime with massive military strikes. And the reason for doing that not only is to take out their entire offensive capability and their defensive capabilities, and we're coming towards completion of that, right? In the next few days, that part of the war should be complete. The second phase is to strike very hard the IRGC and uh, and the Basij, right? The paramilitary group and the military. And when you strike those hard, and that has begun, and it's really going to intensify probably over the course of the next week. That way, you deal a major, major blow to the repressive apparatus of Iran, and you create space for an uprising, right? And that takes us to the next phase, the third phase. You created space for an uprising, and now you begin to call the people into the streets, and hopefully that leads to regime change. Right, the people overthrow their own government. Now, he was asked the question: Will there be U.S. troops on the ground, Israeli troops on the ground? Trump was asked the question, and he wouldn't rule it out. But this general basically said it's highly unlikely. He said, we will arm the Iranians, and there's already very serious talk that Kurdish groups within Iran might be armed. Other Iranian groups might be armed, but really putting U.S. troops on the ground, Israeli troops on the ground, not very likely. Then he moved on to a different topic, which is why haven't they budged, and why won't they budge? Meaning, why didn't Iran negotiate, and why won't they negotiate? Uh, even as they're being absolutely devastated, and as they see their regime crumbling. And he points to three reasons. First, he says that Iran could not and still cannot show any weakness domestically or internationally. Once they show weakness, that creates an open door for the local population to be emboldened and to rise up and to take to the streets. The other reason why they can't show weakness, and this is something that we've talked about, is that as a Muslim country, they can never surrender to a non-Muslim country, right? It's just not going to happen. It's too much of a humiliation. And it goes against everything that the Iranian regime has preached since taking power in 1979. That is, Islam must dominate the world. And if you surrender to non-Muslim countries, that's an admission that Islam isn't going to take over the world. So that's not going to happen. So that's reason number one. Reason number two for why the Iranian regime has not budged and will not budge or back down, they need nuclear weapons to complete their Islamic project. And what's the Islamic project? To spread Islam not only all over the Middle East, but all over the world. And there's no possible way of achieving that objective without nuclear weapons, right? You can't intimidate other countries. You can't get other countries to back down unless you are a strong nuclear power. So their ultimate goal is not nukes. Their ultimate goal is an Islamic world order. But to accomplish that goal, the necessary instrument that you need is nuclear weapons. So Trump wouldn't give in, right? Trump said absolutely no nukes. And because Trump wouldn't bend, they had no choice but to accept war. So that's the second reason. And then the third reason, it ties into what I just said. The reason why they didn't give in is they were pretty confident that they could get Trump to be flexible on the nuclear issue. They knew that Obama and Biden were both flexible with the nuclear issue. And they saw that Obama was willing to sign a nuclear agreement and delay the timetable for them to get nuclear weapons. And they thought they would be able to convince Trump in the same way that, okay, we won't develop nuclear weapons for the next 5 years, next 10 years, but ultimately, Trump would push it off far enough into the distance that he could live with one day Iran will, have nuclear capability, but it'll be a different president's problem, right? That's what they thought they could convince Trump to do. But Trump didn't bend. Now, why were they so convinced that they could get that Trump would be flexible? Well, number one, Obama was flexible, Biden was flexible, but also there were people in the Trump administration that led them to believe that Trump was so intent on avoiding war that he would be flexible. But we know that Trump has a mind of his own, and he doesn't always listen to his advisors. And of course, not all of his advisors were of that opinion. We know Marco Rubio, for example, had zero interest in allowing Iran to have nuclear capability ever. Okay, then he addressed the question of how do you accomplish regime change? If regime change is part of this objective, and it kind of has to be. No one likes to talk about regime change, but if you don't have regime change and you end up with the exact same types of people that are running this regime, then nothing really changed, right? You have to have people with a different mindset, to be led by people who don't want to conquer the world, that don't aren't bent on the destruction of Israel and the United States, right? You need a new group of people. How do you achieve that? And he said that, look, it's going to take about 2 more weeks at the most to destroy all of Iran's offensive capabilities. It'll be done. It could be sooner than 2 weeks, right? We could be 3 or 4 or 5 days away from it. But let's say a maximum of 2 weeks. Well, it's possible that once that level of destruction is is imposed on the regime, maybe the Iranian regime collapses all by itself. He says it's not likely, but it's also not impossible. More likely, what you need is the people to rise up, right? So once this massive offensive against their offensive capability and the IRGC and the Basij are hit extremely hard and weakened, that's when you're going to get the Trump administration and the Netanyahu government to begin to urge the people in Iran to rise up and to take to the streets to overthrow their government. So we're probably a couple weeks away from that. But it's not time yet, right? That moment, we're not there quite yet. More damage needs to be done. And then he was asked the question, why? It's a question that I was asked the other day, and he gave the same answer. After somewhere between 35 and 50,000 people, or maybe even more, were brutally murdered in the streets, why will they rise up again? And his response was, the Iranian people have proven themselves to be incredibly courageous. And this time, it's clear that we're helping them. And we're helping them for the explicit purpose of regime change. Now, what are the risks? The risks of not having regime change are that we don't inflict enough damage on the IRGC and the Basij, right? Those two groups remain deeply ideological. Now, they need to be pummeled very, very, very hard. And once the skies are completely safe, that's where you're going to see Israeli and military air force flying much low and hitting the IRGC and the Basij incredibly hard. Now, he also raised the possibility of splits within the regime? Could we see defections? Could we see people within the Basij and the IRGC uh, taking the side of the Iranian people and fighting against the government? And he seemed to think that was unlikely. He seemed to think that was unlikely. Not impossible, but unlikely. Then he was asked the question about what about an opposition? Who is the opposition? And there really is not a good answer to that question at this point. He talked about Reza Pahlavi, the son of the Shah who lives in the United States. He's very popular among some, but the big question is, does he have any legitimacy since he's lived out of the country for many years? It's hard to know. He didn't seem that optimistic that Pahlavi could become the next leader. And as he said, Pahlavi just wants to be a transitional figure to help pave the path towards a future government. Perhaps it would be a democratic government. Perhaps it would be a monarchy of some sort, um, or a soft dictatorship. But but really, other than Pahlavi, there are no real clear opposition figures, leaders of the opposition at this point. Um, but he said, you know what? That's a problem not for today. That's a problem for another day. And we're likely going to have to confront that dilemma, but we're some time away from that. We're still in the process of destroying the regime, destroying the repressive apparatus of the regime, and then we need to call people into the streets. And that's a tomorrow problem, not a today problem, in terms of who's going to be the next leader and what the opposition would look like. Um, he was asked about what what is Israel's top concern right now. And interestingly, he said, well, among our top concerns is it's clear that there are many groups, both on the left and, for example, the Tucker Carlson faction on the right and others, are trying to blame Israel for all of the problems in the United States. And whether this war continues to go at stakes and some issues, where Israel is obviously going to get blamed for this. And, you know, we're sort of helpless in being able to, play a role in addressing that problem. But, that's pretty much out of our hands. But that is, the direction of the U.S. political system and the sentiment among the U.S. population turning against Israel is a concern. And he also went on to say that, it's interesting in the U.S. national security document that was produced about 6 weeks ago. It was very clear that the U.S. military and this Trump administration believes that Israel is a model ally. It's its top ally in the world because it has a very strong military. It has the ability to defend itself. It has the ability to defend U.S. interests in the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf. And there's no other country in the world that plays such a role. And the United States, the people really who know what's going on, and they're very clear about that the United States' top ally in the world is Israel. And at no time in history has two militaries fought side by side, so coordinated, so seamlessly. It's never happened before in all of history. Not with the U.S., not with any other country in the world. This is really unique. And he was just sort of lamenting the idea that the American public doesn't really seem to be aware of this. And a significant percentage of the American public sees Israel as a big problem, when in fact it couldn't be further from the truth, right? Israel is the United States' greatest ally in the world. So that was an interesting perspective. Um, Then he went on to discuss, does the Iranian regime have popular support among the Iranian people? And he said, yes, they do. They have about 15% support. And the problem is that 15%, it doesn't sound very high, but they're the ones with the guns, right? It's mostly the IRGC, the Basij, and people who are family members of the IRGC and the Basij, or close friends to the IRGC and Basij. But 85% of the country is against the regime. And that's why it's so important for these attacks. It's relatively small, but they have all the guns. So that's why the U.S. and Israeli attacks need to hit these two uh, military groups so hard. Then he addressed the question of what happens as Iran, the regime, becomes more and more desperate. And he said there's no doubt that Iran has cells all over the world. And those cells could either be activated, or if the communication networks are completely severed, these cells could just rise up and take action by themselves. So yeah, we run the risk in the United States and everywhere throughout the world in Europe that we could see these cells activated and we could see terrorist attacks. That may be, if Iran wants to create chaos and create a groundswell of, you know, animosity against this war to get Americans to start putting pressure on the Trump administration to stop the war, terrorism could be one of those mechanisms that could be used, and in all likelihood will be used. In some sense, it's surprising that we haven't seen it up until now. Um, and of course, he also mentioned, you could have lunatics acting independently that aren't necessarily sleeper cells, but like we saw in Austin, Texas, just a sympathizer, right? A radical Muslim who's a sympathizer of the Iranian regime, they can just act independently. So that's another potential problem that we confront. Um, then he was asked, what if the regime doesn't fall, right? What if the regime can't be toppled? What then? And he said, look, that is not ideal, but a second a second best would be we will have obliterated, really obliterated their nuclear capability, and set it back by 50 years, 75 years, 100 years. The same thing with their ballistic missile capabilities and their proxy network, right? Just set it back 50 to 100 years, killing all their scientists, just destroying, turning into rubble any factories that they have, and that's not the top, best case scenario, but it's a second best, and it can't be ruled out. That's a possibility. Um, and also, you know, along with that, their proxy network will be absolutely decimated and wiped out, and be put in a position where they really can't do any damage for a long, long, long time. Then he went on and talked about an important unintended consequence that Iran, sort of an, a self goal, right? You call it in soccer a self goal. Nobody could have imagined that Iran would be facing an alliance comprised of the United States and Israel. Yes, that makes sense. But then the Arab world joining in and fighting together against the Iranian regime. And that is one of the unintended consequences of Iran, 60% of their missiles being launched at their Arab neighbors, right? They hoped that would cause Arab countries to put pressure on Trump. Instead, what it's mostly done is cause these Arab countries to align not only with Israel, not only with the United States, but Israel. And this myth that the Arab world has told its population that the greatest threat to these Arab countries is Israel, that myth is melting away because clearly the greatest, the only country that ever attacked another Arab country without reason, right? It wasn't Israel, it was Iran, it was another Muslim country. So that is that could have very powerful and far-reaching implications going into the future. Um, then he addressed some risks. I mentioned one risk that he was concerned about, which is, the American public blaming Israel for so many things. And if this war doesn't go perfectly, and if even it does go perfectly, Israel will be blamed in some way. Another risk he was concerned about is he's not worried about us not destroying Iran, right? That's not a risk. It's happening, right? That, of course, bad things could still happen, right? You could see, God forbid, an accident with I don't even want to say it. I won't even say it, but bad things could happen. But even if those bad things happen, the Iranian regime is for sure on its way to absolute devastation. So that's not a risk. He's not worried about Iran's offensive capability remaining. Right? That's not something he's concerned about. What he's concerned about is maybe things go too well, and because things go too well, we overreach. We, meaning the United States and Israel, overreach, and we get into the nitty-gritty of building what's called nation building, helping to construct a new regime, and that's really not our wheelhouse. And things start to backfire and get ugly, and we start to get into what's labeled a forever war, even though it wouldn't be a war anymore. It would be nation building, but that's not necessarily the job for militaries to do. So he doesn't want us to get into nation building, and if we do, so that's one risk. And the other risk is it could be that at some point Iran is sufficiently devastated, but the regime hasn't fallen. And the United States might want to end the war, and Israel might want to finish the job, right? So the question is, Israel may want to go all the way and topple this regime, and Trump may say, look, we've done it, we've done enough, let's stop. So if there is a disagreement, how does that disagreement get resolved? And will it create strains? Now, I'll give you my personal take. I'm not worried about either of those. I think both countries, especially Israel, knows that it would be a mistake to go against Trump. And if Trump wants to end the war, and if Trump tells Israel, I want you to end the war also, Israel will end the war. If Trump says, look, we're out, but keep going. If you want to keep going, then there won't be a tension. There won't be a problem. And I think that's the way it would go. They'll either stop together or Trump would give Israel the green light to keep going. On nation building, I think both countries are very aware of what their limitations are. And I don't think we're going to put either of our militaries into jobs that they can't achieve, they can't complete successfully. I understand, he was asked to discuss risks. He discussed risks. He wasn't asked what are the probabilities of those risks sort of playing out. But I would put those risks at something like 15 to 20% probability. I'm not overly concerned. So anyway, I think that sort of completes the discussion of these two generals. I came away very much confident in my own views of that this war is going incredibly well, and convinced that investors are actually quite lost and are being wildly misled by the media. But it's going to take some time before reality sets in, and people are going to see and recognize the facts on the ground. And in the meantime, oil prices continue to surge. The stock market continues to come under a lot of pressure, and we won't see end in sight until it's crystal clear, and the media can't deny it anymore, that this war actually went really well. and there is no disruption in oil supplies, and actually quite the opposite. Now that Iran is not such a danger, oil supplies will actually increase significantly, and the United States will have uh, massive influence on an even more significant percentage of the world's oil reserves, right? Now we have huge influence over Venezuela's oil reserves. Soon we'll probably have huge influence over Iranian oil reserves, right? They're not going to just be able to easily sell discounted oil to China, right? This is going to actually cause a massive, like really significant decline in oil prices. Oil prices are going up and up and up. This is very short-sighted. In a matter of a month, I would say oil prices are going to be $15 to $20 lower than where they are right now. They may and continue to rise over the next couple of weeks, but anyone who's buying oil right now, they better be very nimble because it's going to come tumbling down in fairly short order. And when the truth is recognized, you're going to see this stock market absolutely rip. But for now, we're just going to have to bear through this pain. And as I've been saying, if you have some cash, these are opportunities to nibble. This is indeed a buying opportunity because the world is becoming a better place. And what one thing that's really interesting, who sees all this is the Israelis. They're the ones who are close up, and their stock market has been doing absolutely fine, not selling off. In fact, it's quite a bit higher today than it was the day before the war. And the shekel, every currency is tanking against the dollar. Everyone's running from their currencies, buying the dollar out of fear. The currency that is rock solid is the Israeli shekel, because the Israelis see what's actually they're the closest ones to what's going on the ground. Now, by the way, I was listening to Israeli generals talk about the war since October 7th, 2023. Okay, when Hamas initially attacked Israel. Israeli generals are not optimistic. They tend to worry, they tend to be concerned. Throughout most of the war with Hamas, they were extremely critical of the government. They were criticizing tactics and strategies. They were not optimistic. And it turned out far better than anyone anticipated in Israel. But this time around, because it's so crystal clear that the U.S. and Israel are absolutely delivering massive, massive blows on the Iranian regime, the generals are super optimistic, right? So you could say, oh, but they're biased, they're this, they're that. That's not how they are, right? And I've been following them for long enough to know that they're realistic, and their optimism is absolutely based in a realistic view of what's going on. Okay.